Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. I'm very, very excited to be here this morning and to be able to share some of the things I've learned over the years. And Christine, not to say you were wrong about anything, but this is actually the end of my 6th year teaching JAG. So just a little bit about me as we get started. I'm a husband of 10 years to an amazing woman. I have 2 wonderful children who keep me very, very active, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. This is the end of my 6th year teaching JAG. One of the cool things about my program was I got to start my program from scratch. Some of you guys have stepped into an existing program. Some of you might be starting your own or have started your own. But I was lucky enough to step into a situation where I was the first specialist at my school. A couple other things that are about me that I want to share. I didn't go to college for education. So the lessons that I've learned and I'm sharing today are things I've learned through experience and things I've learned the hard way and through a lot of research. But I studied counseling in college, and with the JAG program, I knew I wanted to invest in students. That was my primary goal. And the education piece was something that came to me as I went along. Something else interesting about me, I was homeschooled until my senior year of high school. And my senior year, I went to a high school of 3,000 students. My graduating class was 849. And so I had this very, very strange experience with public education. But I think it really, really enriched me and it gave me a unique perspective on things. Before I came to JAG, I worked as a DCS case manager. I know we've had a lot of former DCS people work with JAG, and I was a jail guard in our county. So you can see, I knew I wanted to work with people in my community. It was just about finding the right fit. A little bit more about me. I'm going to brag a little bit. So the last 3 years, my school has been a regional CDC champion. I was recognized as one of the specialists of the year for JAG Indiana for my region, along with Mr. Pavey, Mr. Indiana over there. And I fulfilled multiple JAG roles, including regional manager, which has helped me see a lot of different parts of the JAG program and how it should be run. And I attribute these successes to a strategy that I take toward how I run my JAG program, as well as the talents and abilities God's given me and the opportunities he's given me to use them in. So that's just a little bit about me as we get started. This training session is designed to help newer specialists or even some veterans learn how to take these JAG competencies we teach and turn them into lessons. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time on the purpose and philosophy behind the JAG competencies. We're going to talk about different methods that you can use to deliver the competencies. And then hopefully we're going to spend most of our time on different strategies you can use to create a year-long plan for how you cover this curriculum in JAG. So as we look at the history and purpose of these JAG competencies, most of us know that JAG is about mentorship. It's about training. It's about work readiness skills. It's about investing in youth and helping them become employed and figure out their career path after high school. And so last year, I started looking up where these competencies came from. If you've ever read the specialist binder, it has that information, but that is a very big binder. There's a lot of information to distill there, and it might be something you did when you were first hired or you kind of glanced through it. But these competencies that we teach in JAG, they come from a body of employers that worked with JAG, and they said that these are the skills somebody needs to know in order to be effective at what they do, to be a good employee. And these standards have been affirmed several times throughout the course of JAG since 1980. And they have modified some of them. They have added some things to increase these competencies. And I was kind of curious, why are they called competencies and not curriculum? Because when you think about the classes in a high school, it's curriculum. You're delivering curriculum or instruction or standards. Why are these called competencies? You just look at the definition of competent, having the necessary ability, knowledge, or skill to do something successfully. So what this tells me is these JAG competencies are not about a theoretical framework of knowledge. It's not about, in this sense, the ability and skills to learn different subjects. For the purpose of JAG, competencies are things we want our students to be able to do. We want them to be competent in. And so that's really revealing about the whole purpose and point of how we're teaching what we're teaching. I'm not going to go into each of the individual competencies today, but I did put up just an overview, and you can see in bold here, we've got our core competencies, our core 37 JAG competencies and the different categories they belong in. And so each year, I'm going to suggest that you should try to cover all of your core competencies. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the big reasons is there are some times you will only have a senior in your program for 1 year. And then we have some of these other competencies down here at the bottom, the G competencies, the H competencies, and the I competencies. And if you've never really looked at the G competencies, these are wonderful life survival skill ones. Students are very, very interested in these. And I find them very, very helpful at the end of the school year, right before students are about to graduate. The I competencies are about economic empowerment, so understanding things like insurance and how to run a small business. And then the workplace competencies, the H competencies, are really something a student learns when they're on the job or in an internship. But I want us to think about these core competencies, A through F, and how we can deliver those each program year. So I'm going to suggest something. The purpose of these competencies, if your student knows what career field they want to pursue and how to do so, if they can prepare themselves for a job by tailoring their resume and covering and a cover letter, and represent themselves in a positive way during interviews, if your students can keep a job and make their organization a better place as an employee, if they can reflect what they know through reading, writing, and using basic math skills, if your students can be a good team member and good team leader, and if your students know what they value in life and what's important to them, what do you think your follow-up results will look like? If you know beyond the shadow of a doubt you've taught them each of these things, what do you think your follow-up results will look like? I think that follow-up will start to take care of itself. We're always going to have students that struggle in different areas, but if we make sure we're teaching them these skills each year, we're setting them up on a path to success. The other thing is that if you're making sure you're teaching these skills effectively each year, others are going to view your program in a positive light. Your other students at your school are going to view it effectively. Your administration is going to come to love the program when they see your successes, as well as your managers, your coworkers, and JAG Indiana. So some questions to ask yourself as we're getting started. How will your students know these skills unless you teach them? How can you teach these skills most effectively? And how can you plan out a year-long approach for these lessons? Because one of the unique things about JAG is we don't teach the same thing every semester or trimester, depending on the school you're at. We have to have 180 days worth of curriculum that does not repeat itself in a year. And that's not to say we can't review things, but what I mean is you're not teaching 2 sections of Algebra 1, one in the fall and one in the spring, and you can do the 2 sections exact same way. You have to plan out that 180 days of instruction. So let's now that we've talked about the history and the purpose of the JAG competencies, I kind of want to dive into different methods that you can use to deliver them. So some of you guys are familiar with how JAG is divided into 3 levels of delivering competencies. And if you're not, I'm just going to briefly go over this. There are 3 levels that we record our model services in JAG Force: a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. Level 1 is introduction. I show you, I inform you, I give you information. Level 2 is practice. We work on things together until level 3 mastery. You can do it on your own. You don't need any help from me. So JAG kind of splits everything up into these 3 different levels for each of the competencies or curriculum that you deliver. You can deliver multiple levels in a day. You have to record your model services separately. But it's important to note that JAG defines these 3 different levels for a reason. And if you look at the reason, you have to look at a little bit of the philosophy of delivering education. So there's common teaching philosophies out there. There's 2 major approaches. There's a teacher-centered philosophy in which the focus is on the teacher and what they can deliver to students. And then there's a student-centered philosophy. And I'm not going to get too much into it today. But in the teacher-centered philosophy, this is really, really, really old school style teaching. The teacher is always front and center in the classroom. Be like me, these are the rules, this is rigid, do it this way, this is your education. And there's a lot of lecturing in that and traditional instruction. There's a lot of rigidity in that approach. But we see in the last 20, 30 years in education, it's become more student-centered. And so there's three major philosophies of the student-centered education which show up in our JAG curriculum. There's a progressivism philosophy where you focus on things that are interesting to a student. And so we do this in our project-based learning, our PBL, one of our JAG pillars. And that's where the teacher serves more as a facilitator and a guide. There's a social reconstructionism philosophy, the idea that a student's education will go out and change society, not just learn about society. And we see this show up in our service learning projects. And then existentialism. It's the focus of teaching the whole student. You're not just delivering education, you are making it personal to that student. And we see this in our trauma-informed care. We see this in some of our F competencies where a student learns what is important to them, what they value. And this is really cool when you think about the student-centered approach, because that's what makes JAG different than teaching other classes. It is, in my opinion, the most useful class a student can take in high school, because the things they learn in JAG are more applicable to their life after high school than any other subject. But that's my own personal bias about JAG. And if you look at these two philosophies and you match them up with the JAG levels here, it's kind of interesting because you see both a teacher-centered and a student-centered approach in teaching the JAG competencies. So that level 1, that could be more the teacher-centered approach where you are delivering something, you're doing traditional instruction, you are giving out key concepts. The level 2 practice, you're working on something with students, and the level 3 mastery is really student-centered. If a student is doing their own resume, that needs to be something that's personal to them. If a student is learning how to be a team member, what role they could play, that's something that's personal to them. And when they've mastered it, that's really student-centered. So it's kind of cool how JAG has its own unique philosophy toward education if you look at the levels, and how it matches those different approaches. That being said, we'll talk about different methods today, but you have to decide on your own teaching philosophy, how you think it's most effective to deliver this curriculum. So real quick about that level system too, why I think it's important. It provides a structure for delivering the JAG competencies and for teaching JAG. It organized lessons in a predictable way. You're supposed to work through the levels in order, level 1, then level 2, then level 3. And it also allows you to mark a student's progress. If you've had a student that was out for all of the level 1 instruction that you delivered and a lot of the level 2 practice because they were quarantined because of COVID, you don't expect them to step into your classroom and immediately be able to perform a level 3. You realize that you will have to catch that student up. So it allows you to mark their progress. But it also provides this learning accountability for learning outcomes for both you and the student. Our expectations are that by the time a senior has graduated from a JAG program, they will have had the opportunity to master the core 37 competencies. So they might master some as a junior and then some more as a senior. But if they're in your program only 1 year as a senior, that really puts the pressure on mastering these competencies in 1 year. So where do we start? We've talked a lot about the history and philosophy, but where do you start in delivering these JAG competencies? Well, if you look at how a teacher would have to design lessons, they have to create these objective statements. They have to say, this is the point and purpose that we're meeting together today, and how do I know when my students have achieved these goals? We have to do something similar when we record our model services. It is a reflection of what we have done with the students, and we need to be intentional. Instead of just doing something with students and then hopefully recording it as a positive model service, we need to think about what we want students to take out of each and every one of those 180 days. So a teacher might set an objective statement that says something like, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to understand the sections of a resume. And how will you know when a student has achieved that goal? An example could be they cut out sections of a resume from one worksheet and they glue them to a template of another worksheet to show that they know where the contact information goes, where the objective statement goes, where the education and the work experience and the skills and the interests go. that would be a way of a teacher organizing a lesson so that they show that they have an objective for students to learn and a way to assess whether or not their students have gotten that learning. So I have another example here that we're going to skip because I think you guys get the point on that. But there are all these cool different methods that we get to use to delivering our JAG competencies. And I think there's a lot of methods that can make other teachers jealous because there are some really cool things that we get to do in JAG that you might not get to do in an algebra classroom or a history classroom or an English classroom. So I want to look at some of these different methods that you can use to deliver JAG competencies. You have a traditional instruction approach where this could be set up like a normal classroom. And it's okay to do that sometimes in JAG, to have some formal teaching, because students like that predictability. They're used to that system. And in fact, I think you should incorporate traditional instruction in most everything, but we'll talk about that toward the end. The Career Association is a really cool option that we have for delivering JAG competencies, where students are able to take charge of their learning. They get to make some of the choices and fulfill different roles in their learning. The CDC is a wonderful method to deliver JAG competencies. Some people have mixed feelings about it, but hopefully by the time we get done today, you'll have a pretty good feeling about the CDC and delivering JAG competencies. But it provides an opportunity for students to practice the skills we are teaching them and then showcase them in a public forum. Project-based learning is another wonderful method for delivering JAG competencies. And there are lots of different PBLs you can find on the JAG PBL library website. And you can use this to cover just about anything in JAG. You can also deliver JAG competencies through personal conversations with your students. These could be those personal conversations in the hallways where you talk with a student about something that's going on with them, whether it's their personal values or a job they're trying to get, and you can record that as a model service, a level 1 in JAG Force. Sometimes you have to act like a coach to deliver the JAG competencies, where you're really pushing students to achieve academically, and you're providing opportunities for them to do that with study hall time or work time. You can use guest speakers to teach your JAG competencies, which is a really, really cool option that we have. You can have somebody come in and teach on something that you might not feel confident or knowledgeable about. For example, this past year, I had somebody come in and talk about FAFSA. It's been 10 years since I've had to fill out FAFSA form. I couldn't remember what to do. So we had somebody come in and talk about how to do those things, and they delivered some of those JAG competencies for me. Providing internships is a fantastic method of teaching JAG competencies, both some of the C and the H competencies, or working with students who are working somewhere and having direct conversations about what they're learning through their employment. You will sometimes function as a case manager, one-on-one meetings with students. You might be helping them access resources in the community after class. You might be helping hook them up with a job. You might be helping to make sure the resume is ready to go and providing some time out of class to work on that like a case manager would, and you can deliver JAG competencies that way. Team building exercises are another fantastic method. We have lots of silly games and different things we do in JAG to keep students engaged, but they're also really effective and they make your class stand out. You do need to talk about with students why you're doing different team building exercises. Always have a point and purpose to them, but they are a fantastic method of delivering the JAG competencies. Service learning is built in as a program expectation. Each of our students are expected to do about 10 hours a year in service learning, and that's a great way of teaching JAG competencies because students get hands-on experience that they can put on a resume. But really, it takes the learning outside of the classroom and makes it impactful. It's no longer theoretical, it becomes real life. Field trips, that's another fantastic experience that students have where they can learn these JAG competencies. Movies and videos, use them. I definitely recommend using them, but once again, as I said with team building exercises, have a point and purpose, have a debrief, have a discussion. If you're just showing a movie to show a movie, it's not really effective at delivering those JAG competencies. And if anybody has any other ideas, they can feel free to put those in the chat of any other methods. I don't have a comprehensive list here, but I wanted to cover a lot of the different methods that you can use to cover these JAG competencies. I want you to think of each of those as a different vehicle. They're a vehicle for delivering that curriculum. And everybody's got their favorites. I don't think there is one that's best or most important. I think you need to use a variety, but it needs to be your signature style. No two specialists can deliver their JAG program in the same way, and no two specialists should design their teaching in the same way. You need to use your skills and your abilities. You need to think about your students' interests and how you can use those different methods to teach your JAG competencies. But no matter what methods you use, there are a couple common steps that you have to take in order to use them. So number one, you can't teach JAG if you don't know what it is you're supposed to be teaching. I recommend reading through those old JAG curriculum manuals. And yes, I know that's a daunting task. I know the curriculum is old, but I recommend reading through the key concepts that JAG National provides for each of those competencies. They have a vision in them that JAG wants students to know. I recommend reading through them so you have a pretty clear vision of what JAG expects students to know. The question to ask yourself is, if you don't fully understand what you're being asked to teach, how can your students understand it? And I've been in that situation before where I was trying to teach something to students that I didn't understand, and those lessons did not go over well. My students did not enjoy the experience, and they didn't learn very much because I wasn't prepared enough. So make sure you understand what it is you're being asked to teach. Another step that each of these methods takes is you have to begin with the end in mind. I mentioned this with using team building exercises and movies. There has to be a point and purpose to them. So you need to begin with the end in mind. You design your lessons backwards. What do I want my students to be able to do? And how can I work backwards from there? What methods or vehicles best align with that competency? So are you going to have your students master the E competencies through career association activities? Will they master the A competencies through a CDC competition? And it's okay to change that method and vehicle each year for your students that return to your JAG program, but you need to begin with the end in mind. You start backwards. What is my level 3 for each of these competencies? And I'm hoping at the end here, I can show you an example of some of the different things that I use as level 3s for each competencies. And if I don't have time to get into it today, I will make sure that there's a link at the end of this presentation that will lead you to a Google Drive folder that has all of these resources. So I will make sure you get a copy of this presentation. All right, so after you understand your curriculum, after you know what your level 3s are, now you can work on your level 2s. You start planning those next. How can I break that level 3 down into small steps and give my students the opportunity to practice it piecemeal? There's many different ways of practicing a competency. And here's what I love about the level 2s the most when you're designing your JAG curriculum. You have the greatest variety available to you in a level 2. You have the greatest variety available for what you can do to practice different competencies. You can use so many different methods for a level 2. But you need to ask yourself, are those steps clearly leading your students where you want them to go? If you're doing a PBL and the end of the PBL is your level 3, are you building those level 2 steps in there that are clearly leading your students toward where they're supposed to be going? And you can also appeal to a lot of different learning styles through practice. I know Celeste will be talking about the different learning styles and universal design for learning. So hopefully you can get a copy of her presentation and learn about those as well. But there's a theory that everyone has a different learning style or learning styles that they prefer. And so you can appeal to a lot of different learning styles, such as learning visually or through hearing or through tactile manipulation or through writing. There's a lot of different theories on how students learn, but you can do many of those different level 2s. And then finally, look at your level 1s and ask yourself, if I know what my end goal is and I've got the steps to get there, what information do my students need to know in order to accomplish the tasks that I'm planning for them? What is the best way to introduce that information? Should I lecture? Should we have a discussion? Should I have a key concept sheet that my students read through? Do I need to bring in guest speakers? Do I need to show a video? How do I want to present the information that they need to know to practice these skills and eventually master them? Are you overwhelming your students with too much information? Are you not giving them enough information? Do you need to revisit that information later in the year because you covered resumes in September and now it's April and your students are applying for jobs and you need to go back to that level 1 information? Don't ever assume that what you're teaching in JAG is common knowledge. The reason our program exists is because our students need to understand these JAG competencies. You can't rely on the fact that they might learn it in another class, or that they might learn it from their parents or their peers, or they might do the research themselves. Don't assume that any of your competencies are common knowledge. You can assess and see if students already know things, but don't start planning your lessons with the idea that students already know these things. All right, so we've talked about those different methods there. We've talked about you have to understand the competencies, plan your level 3s, break those down into level 2s, decide what level 1s you want to include. And then after you teach JAG each year, you should save a copy of what you teach and look back. Do I want to teach it that same way next year? Do I want to do something different? So now we're going to get to my favorite part. These are some strategies for creating a year-long approach to JAG curriculum. These are some lessons that I've learned over the last 6 years. So first of all, what we teach is pretty broad. We have a lot of information to cover because, as I mentioned earlier, JAG is the most applicable class that students will take, the most applicable class to what they're going to be using after high school. There's not a map either. I know that Brianna had mentioned that they're working on a 1-year curriculum map to help new specialists work through things. It is a fantastic approach, but oftentimes you are put into a situation and you're told, teach this, and you don't know where to start. So sometimes you might work through the A competencies at the beginning of the school year. When I first started teaching, I would begin every school year with the F competencies because I went to college for counseling, and I was most comfortable with those competencies. You might start with your favorite projects first, or the things you know the most about, or the things that seem most engaging. So there's a lot of different strategies you can use to approach how you plan out a year worth of curriculum. I'm going to give you guys a series of recommendations here. So here's what I would recommend first when you're planning out a year-long approach. Focus on your teaching first. Prepare for each year as if you will have to teach every single competency, because you can rely on yourself when the unexpected happens. I've had guest speakers cancel the night before or the morning that they were supposed to come into class. I've had service learning projects fall through because of the weather. I've had field trips get canceled, or we weren't able to go because of COVID or other circumstances. And in those situations, if you just go to the classroom and say, well, I guess we're going to hang out for 60 minutes or an hour and a half or however long your class is, you're asking for trouble. A lot of classroom management trouble by just giving students unstructured free time in class. So if you focus on creating your lessons first and how you would approach teaching every single competency, it is much easier to say, I'm not going to teach this particular competency. I have a guest speaker that I have a contact with that can come in and teach this for me. So yes, I could teach this. I'm prepared to teach this, but somebody else can do it for me. And you can start to cut out some of your own lessons after you're prepared. My next recommendation is that the CDC should guide your teaching. I learned from Christine Schaefer that you saw earlier on the call that the CDC is the JAG Super Bowl. It is a big reason of what we do each year. And competition can bring out some wonderful things in us, but I think it should guide our teaching because it gives our students a really, really cool way to practice what we're teaching them. I think it is probably the biggest event in a JAG program year at most schools, and most of your competencies can be mastered through the CDC competitions. For example, I teach the career presentation competition to all of my students, and that serves as the mastery project for all 6 of the A competencies because we work through it step by step by step, and we put it all together in the career presentation competition as we go. And so that's how I know that through their presentation and the research they've done and the steps they've taken, that they have mastered each one of those competencies. Another recommendation I'm going to give you is that you need to teach every single CDC competition as a part of your class. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. At first I thought, oh, maybe this is cheating, or this isn't a really good approach to the CDC. But what I realized is when I teach every single CDC competition, it usually takes me until right up from the start of the school year right up to about Christmas, maybe a little bit in January as well. But that way, my students have the opportunity to experience every CDC competition in my classroom. And when it's time to sign up for the CDC, they already have most of the work done, and they already know which competitions most appeal to them and where their skills and talents lie in those different competitions. And so then I make participating in the CDC an assignment in and of itself in class. So that way nobody can weasel out and just not participate in the CDC. Everybody has to, because they've all had the experience of each of the competitions through a project in my class. Recommendation 3, use your career association as a vehicle for delivering the e-competencies, and use it often. I decided this past year that every Friday was going to be a career association day in my class. Some Fridays my students would plan activities to do. Some Fridays I would plan more career association themed things. Some Fridays we would have our career association meetings, but we would have a nice end to our week. We would work on those team leadership and team membership competencies on Fridays. And we use it as a vehicle for practicing and mastering a lot of the e-competencies. The Career Association also plays an important role in the CDC chapter events. So some Fridays we would talk about what we want to do for the CDC chapter competitions, for a social media campaign. We didn't spend as much time on our JAG commercial this year, and that project fell through. We didn't have anything to submit for the CDC because I didn't plan enough time with the Career Association to work on that throughout the fall. But the Career Association also creates this positive team-based environment in your classroom, which helps so much with classroom management. If you can work on building your students into a team once a week, it helps eliminate a lot of those little problems where students are just saying mean things to each other because they're bored, or because they don't know enough about each other, or they don't value each other. So definitely use the Career Association as a vehicle for the e-competencies, and use it often. Recommendation number 4, definitely use as many guest speakers and field trips as you can to replace those lessons. I talked about recommendation number 1, plan your curriculum first, and then see what you can cut out and include guest speakers and field trips for, because it's much easier that way. Sometimes field trips get canceled for unforeseen reasons, or guest speakers get sick the day before they're supposed to be there. Recommendation number 5, plan work time into your classes. If every Friday is a career association day, every Wednesday in my class is a study hall day. That's something I learned from Derek Morgan many, many years ago when I first started with JAG. Every Wednesday, I have time for students to work on homework. I check in with every student on their grades. They come up to my desk, we look at Power School, and I see what they're doing. If they have C's or above, we're usually pretty good. If we have D's or we're failing classes, we take a pretty close look at those classes, what they're missing, and how they can get caught up. And then I go around and I help students with homework. Or if I know that I've got 3 different juniors in US History A all working on the same project, I ask them to work together on the same project. Another beautiful thing about planning work time into your class once a week is that you can coach students on how to talk to teachers. Yeah, I really hate my algebra teacher, but I'm missing all this work and I don't want to talk to her because I know she's going to yell at me. You can coach a student on how to talk with their teachers in the same way that you should be teaching them how to talk with their bosses someday, right? It's that same skill set that they need to learn. Another useful part of including a workday into your JAG class is when your students are quarantined or they're missing out on one of those JAG levels, you can have them get caught up on a Wednesday. Another useful part as well is staying on top of your seniors' progress, knowing exactly what classes they need to pass to graduate. A lot of this work is done on Wednesdays in my classroom. And in 6 years, I've only had 2 seniors in my program not graduate. And one of those 2 seniors went back and got his GED later in the fall. But the reason I almost always have a 100% graduation rate is I stay on top of seniors' progress to graduation on workday Wednesdays. And if they're in credit recovery, they are working on those classes in my classroom on Wednesdays. And then finally, if a student has all A's in all their classes or they're all caught up, they should be rewarded for that. You allow time for enrichment. You can do mindfulness things for them. You can provide mandalas or coloring sheets, or you can ask them to work on something for your JAG program. Maybe they're a career association leader. Hey, can you work on some service learning ideas today? Or can you be a leader and go help out this person with English 12 because I know they're really struggling. All right, my next recommendation, service learning. Plan out some small events in the fall to get the ball rolling. I know the Career Association is supposed to guide service learning, but if students don't know what they want to do or they haven't had experience with it, it's really intimidating for them to plan out a service learning event. So each fall, you can plan out some small events to get the ball rolling and give them experience with service learning. It could be something where they're writing encouraging chalk messages on the school sidewalk with the custodian's permission, of course, or they are doing something for Veterans Day. You plan out several smaller things in the fall for students to start getting the ball rolling with service learning. And then after the CDC, you can plan out some bigger things. Your career association will be well established later in the year. You will have more time to focus on some bigger service learning projects after the CDC. But definitely build a brainstormed list of events with your career association. During those Friday meetings, ask them what some good ideas that they have are. And so when you get to post-CDC time in your school year, you pull out that brainstorm list. Hey, we talked about doing this in the fall. Are you guys still interested in hosting a clothing drive? Definitely with service learning, plan some events that can be completed during class time. You could do this on Fridays. You could do this really any day, but plan some events that can be completed during class and some that can be completed outside of class, but plan some that can be completed during class because some students won't have transportation. They won't be interested in staying after school or meeting up on a weekend to do a service learning event. So plan some small ones that you can do as a lesson day. And then always debrief, always find out what they learned, what they know, what they thought was important about a service learning event. Number 7, plan units of curriculum. Group similar competencies into units, and then you want to map out how long you think it's going to take to get through something. I know when I teach all 6 of the A competencies as the Career Association, the Career Presentation Competition from the CDC, it takes me about 4 weeks to get through. I have to plan time in my schedule that I can fit those 4 weeks in there. I'm not going to do half of them right before fall break and expect my students to come back and remember that when we come back from fall break. So you want to figure out about how many weeks it'll take to teach each unit or project, and then fit those into a year-long schedule looking at your school calendar. My next recommendation, this is part of the same one. Look at that school calendar. There are some very predictable things. The CDC is almost always in late January to early February, and our state one is in March. We know when graduation and midterms and finals, and sometimes we know when I-STEP testing are, sometimes they surprise us. But there are some other things. You know when different holidays are, like Veterans Day, so you can plan appropriately with service learning. You know when Christmas break is to make sure that you've got projects wrapped up before you get to Christmas break. College Go Week is always the last full week of September. If you want to make sure you include that in your career presentation assignment, you make sure that you plan that during September or part of August and September. So make sure you plan around those events when you're planning your week-long units. Number 8, after the CDC, plan some lessons and prepare students for the end of the school year. So make sure you are reviewing your resumes in the springtime and you are working on filling out practice job applications, because around March and April are when students are wanting to be putting in applications for summer jobs. If your students are waiting until the end of May, most of the jobs you're interested in might already be filled. Definitely focus on life survival skills, some of the G competencies later in the school year. This makes follow-up easier. If you're teaching your students some of those skills in the springtime, it's fresh in their minds and they can hit the ground running after graduation. Student learning definitely takes an interesting turn after spring break when you have those 6 to 8 weeks with no days off until the end of the school year. Student motivation wanes, and so you want to be strategic in what kind of lessons or projects that you do in that part of the school year. Keep the students busy, but not with busy work. You're not doing a student a favor by giving them free time. Always have some extra things that you can go over with students. Keep a bank of team building exercises that can enhance your students' experiences. So it could be Wikipedia races. There's some, if you're interested in those. It could be Mad Gabs for communication skills. There's a wonderful TARP game that works on communication and team membership skills. And it never hurts to practice a previous competency again, because repetition is the mother of memory. So keep some of those things. If you still have 20 minutes in class, make sure you've got a bank of things that you can go over. Another recommendation is that mentorship is made of small connections every day. You don't have to think that you have to have some weeks-long approach toward it. You definitely can, but when you make connections with students, it's really about those everyday interactions, those small interactions toward building that relationship with them. And then my last recommendation is plan 2 years at a time. You're going to be covering the same core competencies each year, because you might have students that are in your program for only 1 year as a senior, and they're supposed to master that curriculum in 1 year. But think about what you can do differently each year. And eventually you're going to build this rotating schedule, year 1, year 2, year 1, year 2, where you can go back and forth on your curriculum and you can improve upon it, but you've got a structure outlined for each year. And that way you are giving your students a new experience. Quality teaching equals better results. I'm not going to go through all the rest of this today, because I will make sure you guys have a copy of this presentation. But as we look at this last slide here, there's a link to resources. If you click on this, there's a Google Drive folder that you should be able to access, and it has got a copy of this presentation. It's got a copy of a plan I used last year, where I mapped out unit by unit, week by week, as the school year went along. It's got a copy of a document I used where I decided what project was going to serve as a level 3 for each of the competencies, and some other goodies like that should help you plan things out. I just want to be able to share some of my experiences and some things I've learned on how to plan a year-long approach toward JAG. And that's all I've got. So does anyone have any questions for me?
No questions? All right.
Well, you will send out the slide deck, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. I took pictures, but your quality will be better.
Yeah. If you want to type your email address in the chat as well, I can copy and paste those and make sure everybody who's attending gets a copy of this presentation.
Danny, if you just want to send that to me, what I will do is make sure that we upload it on the link to your Google Drive on the JAG Genius on the Indiana page.
Okay.
So everyone will be able to go in and view Danny's resources.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Danny. Wealth of knowledge and information.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
And if you want to hang around, we've got a few more minutes. If you would like to go ahead and leave and exit out, we will see you in the DeBruce session in 15 minutes. Get a drink, hydrate yourself, get up, move, do whatever you need to do, and we will see you in a few minutes.